This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence. This week, the mysterious deaths of some 400 American children each year.
Why did Julian pass away? That's the number one question I have, right? Because we don't have an answer yet.
A category of death that's largely unknown when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
Farmers consume somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of all the water in the West.
Water levels are at record lows. How can we consume less and increase supply? Then,
in the 1960s, 95% of what Americans wore was American-made, and today that is less than 2%.
The true cost of cheap clothes. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
Almost everyone loves celebrating a birthday. It's usually a joyous day, especially for parents celebrating their children. For the Torres family, July 2016 started as a month of birthdays, but ended as the month of tragedy.
We had an amazing weekend and celebration on Sunday. Put our son to bed like any normal day, and I went to work the next day.
That's how Estuardo Torres remembers the weekend of his daughter's 6th birthday, full of family, fun, and familiarity. But everything changed the next morning when his 2-year-old son, Julian, was found dead.
My wife found Julian in his little bed. He was not breathing, and he had passed away overnight.
Torres is a father of 3 from Glenview, Illinois. It's now been 5 years since his son tragically and mysteriously passed away during the night, less than 2 weeks after his 2nd birthday. The day Julian died is a blur for Torres, but the pain is as raw and vivid as ever.
I got a call that I had to go to the hospital. I thought it was just something minor. I wasn't expecting that, what I found when I got to the hospital. But my wife was the one that was here at the house and had to call 911 and get him transported to the hospital. But the first responders that came were very nice, but they kind of already knew that Julian had passed away. And it was such a roller coaster for us because we went from this beautiful, happy celebration day a day before, and less than 24 hours we were dealing with the loss of our son and didn't know what had happened. I always say that that life ended that day, and I started a new life on July 25th, 2016. I started this new life.
There are so many questions the Torres family had. The biggest one, what killed Julian? That question went unanswered. Julian's death is classified with a cold clinical name: sudden, unexplained death in childhood.
To me, I see it as more of a category of death and not really a cause of death. It just kind of explains that we have a child who died suddenly, who was otherwise healthy, and during the investigation and after the autopsy and after laboratory testing and other testing that is performed by a medical examiner, there still was not an adequate explanation for why the death occurred. And so we call that a category of death.
That's Dr. Eric Eason, the assistant medical examiner in Cook County, Illinois. He says that categorizing a death under SUDC is a complicated process that sometimes takes weeks.
So trauma needs to be excluded first, and that's usually found out during the actual autopsy. Like blunt trauma or any other kind of trauma that may occur to a child, that's usually ruled out on the day of the autopsy. Other causes of sudden death in children could be due to poisoning, toxicity, and that's usually going to be found out with laboratory testing, which takes a couple of weeks after the autopsy to be performed. If that's all negative, then you have things that can be seen under the microscope. And so a tissue that's obtained during the autopsy is examined under the microscope. You can find things like pneumonia, other signs of infection, other kind of conditions that can cause sudden death. If everything's totally negative, then the category becomes the sudden unexplained death in childhood, where chances are that the death is probably due to natural causes, but we just cannot find an exact cause of what the death is.
While SUDC is a category and not an answer, it helps researchers find patterns. Laura Gould Crandall is a research scientist in the Department of Neurology at NYU Langone's Comprehensive Epilepsy Center.
It's a category of deaths that unfortunately happen to some children after their first birthday, and it's a way of grouping them together by putting them in this category so that we can learn more from them, so we can learn prevention strategies and move forward in terms of reducing and eliminating this problem overall. It's something that is not common, but when you know what the statistics are, you find that it's far too common than any of us ever thought.
It's frustrating as a grieving parent to be told there's no answer as to why your child suddenly died, and Crandall understands that frustration more than anyone. In 1997, she lost her first child, 15-month-old Maria, to SUDC.
In terms of toddlers, which are the most frequent victims of unexplained death in childhood, it actually ranks as the 5th leading category of death in children ages 1 to 4, which is much higher than I even anticipated when this occurred with me and with my family. And every medical professional I asked at the time said, yeah, we've never heard of a 15-month-old dying where a cause is not found. This must be really rare. This must be this kind of one-off problem, not a public health problem in general.
SUDC is commonly misunderstood as sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. They're not the same. SIDS is a category made strictly for babies less than 12 months old who die suddenly.
The thing is, they know about SIDS a lot, know about sudden infant death. And I said, this is not that, because that only is classified under a year. So this is not SIDS. And I have to explain to people all the time, it's not SIDS, it's not SIDS. You know, my son was over 2 years old. He was already sleeping on his own.
SUDC is more rare than SIDS. It affects at least 400 children a year, but few people are aware of SUDC. When Ron and Jordana Sahara suddenly lost their 20-month-old son Luke, they had never heard of it.
I went up there to his room to go wake him up, just normal. Usually he'd hear you, so he'd get up and stand up on the crib and ready to come get you unless he's really tired. And I went to go get him, and there was no motion, no nothing. And I went to touch him, and he was definitely cold to the touch.
This was just, it was shocking to know that healthy children can pass, and you just have no idea why.
The Zaharas described their son as loving, daring, and healthy. They were devastated when Luke died, and even worse, no one could give the Zaharas an answer as to why. Their deputy coroner had never even heard of SUDC prior to doing research online. Neither did their pediatrician, or hardly anyone else in their lives. But how can something so tragic get so little attention? Part of the problem is a lack of funding for research. SUDC gets none of the federal funding that goes toward SIDS research because they're different categories. For now, Crandall says SUDC research at NYU is all privately funded. And from the research that has been done, it's still unclear what the common cause of death is for this group of children, or even if there is one.
It seems that this is a heterogeneous group, that all of these children are not dying of the same thing, but there are probably some leading causes of death that hopefully we can uncover over time. Those associated with cardiac issues, and we have been able to uncover some molecular basis for that in some of the children. We've also found some children who, unfortunately, did have an infectious insult that caused a sudden death, which is unusual. We've also found other genetic findings that have identified an underlying vulnerability to seizures and epilepsy prior to the child ever being diagnosed. The vast majority of the cases that come to us after review are still unexplained, but we are chipping away at the information, so to speak, The majority of children do have minor pathological findings on autopsy, but they are not compelling to the pathologist that it explains their cause of death.
And there's yet another roadblock standing in the way of finding answers to these unexplained deaths. It's the lack of standards when it comes to death investigation.
The surveillance of SUDC in the United States is not ideal. And part of that is due to the fact that we have a very diverse death investigation system throughout the country. Death investigations are state rights. They're not a right for the federal government to control. And therefore, investigations are done differently depending on where you live, in what state, and even within states. Oftentimes, they differ by county. So the information that we're collecting is varied. The certification practices are also varied.
While families struggle to find answers, a lot of them have found support through the SUDC Foundation, which was officially started in 2014. Crandall was one of the co-founders and hoped to raise awareness and provide comfort, as well as information to grieving families. Torres says the foundation has a unique family dynamic, and he became an ambassador to have a more active role.
We found more support through them and help in terms of understanding what we were going through. And because we felt like we were the only ones that had gone through something like this. Didn't understand why. But then we found that there were other families and there were other kids and other toddlers that passed away very similarly in the same way. And we couldn't believe it. That this is happening to other families.
5 years ago, the Torres family got ready to celebrate a month of birthdays. Now they visit Julian in the cemetery, and life goes on.
Doesn't get any easier, by no means, but you learn to kind of deal with it. And for us, July is a tough month because, like I said, his birthday is July 13th. His anniversary is July 25th. And then we have other birthdays and my daughter's birthday, and so it makes it really hard. So my wife still struggles with a lot of it, and we're kind of still dealing with our own grief. It never really ends. It's just kind of deal with it differently.
But while researchers and advocates keep chasing after answers, the questions remain.
Why did Julian pass away? That's the number one question I have, right? Because we don't have an answer yet. But that's the ultimate question. I may never get an answer to that. So I have to live with that. But I have faith. I'm a man of faith, and I'm Catholic, and I believe that I'm going to see my son again.
Grieving families do everything in their power to keep the memories of their children alive. For the Zaharas, that means building a memorial in the backyard, or their daughter taking letters to the mailbox to send to Luke in heaven. Their grief doesn't end, even though the deaths of Julian, Luke, and hundreds of other children may never be explained.
I mean, in time, you hope some of this heals, but it's always going to be with you. And there's always going to be trigger points. And, just because it's been a year, 5 years, or 10, they'll just never get over the loss of a child.
Our writer-producer this week is Reagan Houston. I'm Reed Pence.
COVID-19 vaccines are rolling out, and many Americans are looking forward to getting back to normal. However, chronic stress of the past year can impact memory, mood, and anxiety. So during June, Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, the Alzheimer's Association reminds you to make brain health a priority. Beth Kallmeyer, Vice President of Care and Support for the Alzheimer's Association, has tips to restore mental well-being.
First, think about recommitting to brain-healthy basics, like regular exercise, a heart-healthy diet, and getting plenty of sleep. Try to unplug from technology every night. Do what you can to manage your own stress, especially if you're a caregiver for a person living with Alzheimer's or dementia. And return to normal at your own pace by taking small steps and setting boundaries.
Kallmeyer says it also helps the brain to help others by volunteering in your community. For example, by supporting the Alzheimer's Association's The Longest Day event, June 20th. Find out more about Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month at alz.org.
Pandemic school closures have taken a large toll on both children and their parents, socially, emotionally, and academically. But with prevention steps, including regular PCR-based COVID-19 testing, outbreaks in schools may be largely prevented. In fact, the Biden administration has identified testing in schools as a critical proactive step in recovery from the pandemic. Here's Shiraz Ladiwala, Senior Vice President of Business Transformation Projects, Thermo Fisher Scientific.
Testing for schools can be done accurately, efficiently, and affordably by using pooled PCR testing programs where multiple samples are tested at once. Batch results are reported as positive or negative and returned in 12 to 48 hours, helping to quickly indicate a potential outbreak.
Highly accurate COVID-19 testing helps school administrators detect outbreaks quickly, so informed decisions about in-person learning can be made. Find out more at thermofisher.com/COVID testing for schools.
Cardiovascular or CV disease is the #1 killer of adults in the U.S., and millions of people trying to reduce their risk of a heart attack or stroke may unknowingly be taking medications that are not proven nor FDA approved to reduce cardiovascular risk. Let's hear from cardiologist Dr. John Osborne.
Many people are unaware that after a failed outcome study, the FDA revoked the approval of fenofibrates when added to statins, as the risk outweighed the benefits to heart health. It's important to remember that statins, along with diet and exercise, can lower cardiovascular risk by about 25 to 35%, but persistent cardiovascular risk, which can lead to a life-threatening event, may remain. I would tell anyone still being prescribed fenofibrates, such as Tricor and Trilipix, with a statin, to talk to their doctor about FDA-approved therapies for cardiovascular risk reduction.
To learn more and get clear on the facts, visit itscleartomenow.com. Again, that's itscleartomenow.com.
When it comes to health, there is one area that can be difficult to talk about: colon health. Yet this critical area of well-being is heavily influenced by lifestyle choices. Research shows that 75% of colon cancer cases can be avoided by individual actions, and diet is one critical factor. Registered dietitian Courtney Romano is a health advisor for the California Table Grape Commission.
To promote colon health, a diet rich in whole plant-based foods and low in red meat, especially processed meat, is recommended. An easy first step is to eat more vegetables and fruit, including grapes. Fresh grapes have over 1,600 beneficial plant compounds, including antioxidants and other polyphenols. Research indicates that consuming grapes every day may help support a healthy colon.
Maintaining a healthy diet and weight, not smoking, exercising regularly, and getting screened are other important colon health steps. Grapes of all colors, red, green, and black, are part of a healthy diet. Visit grapesfromcalifornia.com for more information.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
Not going to get your child to be 5 feet 10, 6 feet if they were destined to be 5 feet 5 inches.
Growth hormone for short kids. It's not everything some parents think.
Then, a rare genetic disease whose most deadly symptoms are often hidden.
And that's really the scariest and most critical issue that people with Marfan's will have.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.